Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we are wading into something that our sources describe as, well, one of the most profound psychological events a person can go through the moment you discover betrayal, infidelity.
It's a critical moment. And we're not just talking about heartbreak here or,
Mhm.
sadness. This is a true acute crisis state.
Right.
Our sources actually treat this moment less like relationship trauma and more like what one researcher called a psychological detonation,
Hmm.
a complete system failure.
Okay, let's unpack this. Our mission today is to dissect that initial boom, that overwhelming chaos of discovery.
Mhm.
And then we need to look at the self-destructive coping mechanisms that almost always pop up. We really want to draw a clear line between actions that help you heal and the ones that unintentionally cause lasting, permanent harm.
And we have to start with the biology. What's so fascinating in the research is that this reaction, it's not just emotional. It is a full-blown biological survival-based trauma response.
So you're saying it's not just in your head.
Not at all. When that information hits, your body and your brain react as if you are being physically hunted by a predator. We are talking about literal trauma being registered by your nervous system.
So let's go to that exact moment. Ground zero. The text message, the confession, the receipt you find in a coat pocket. Walk us through what happens. What makes this so much more than just disappointment?
Well, what you've just described triggers what clinicians call betrayal trauma. It's a specific term that elevates this way beyond just feeling hurt or angry.
Because the pain isn't just about losing the person, is it? It's something deeper, a structural failure.
Exactly. The core pain isn't fundamentally about losing the person, it's about losing reality.
Losing reality, wow.
The sources use this incredible metaphor. Your entire worldview, the very ground you stand on, is suddenly liquidated. It just turns to water. Everything you believed about your life, your past, your future, it's gone in an instant. That's the trauma.
So when that sense of safety and control just evaporates, the brain registers that as an existential threat.
Precisely. And it responds instantly by launching into an acute stress response.
Yeah.
The amygdala, your brain's ancient alarm center, it just goes into absolute overdrive.
And this is a chemical reaction.
A literal chemical flood. Cortisol, adrenaline, they just pour into your system. So you aren't just sad, you are physiologically terrified and ready to either fight or run for your life.
That explains so much of the physical side of it, the nausea, the pacing, not being able to sleep or eat. That's just your body trying to manage this chemical explosion.
It is. I mean, think about what that feels like. It's this internal frantic alarm bell that you can't turn off. It makes clear thought impossible. It is a biological survival fight, which is why the behavior that comes next is often so impulsive.
And that desperation for control, for turning off the alarm, that leads us right into the first major pitfall the sources talk about. The betrayed partner becoming a kind of private investigator.
Yes, the detective phase. It's a completely understandable but incredibly dangerous attempt to self-soothe by chasing down data.
You feel helpless, so you try to regain some footing by just gathering information.
Exactly. The internal logic is something like, if I know everything, if I have all the facts, I won't be blindsided again. I can predict the danger.
But the research gives such a strong warning here about pursuing every single detail. Why is that drive to know everything so self-destructive?
Because the search is being driven by trauma, not by rational strategy. It's a profound double-edged sword. And you absolutely have to distinguish between two different kinds of information.
Okay, so what's the difference? What's helpful versus what's just harmful?
You have vital information and you have painful detail. Vital information is what you need for your physical, legal, or emotional safety.
So things like,
Things like, who was it? Is this relationship actually over now? Was protection used? Do I need to get medically tested? These are facts that inform real-world decisions about your health and your future.
right, facts that define the scope of the problem. So what are the painful details?
That's the emotional pornography. It's the information that gives you zero strategic benefit, but delivers maximum emotional harm. Things like, was it better than with me? Where did it happen? What did you say to them? What did they do?
But I could see someone thinking, if I know the worst, I can stop imagining it. Doesn't knowing the details help you prepare somehow?
The research says the absolute opposite is true. That impulse is actually an attempt to anticipate the pain, but getting the details just confirms the worst, and it sticks. It gets seared into your brain.
How so?
Because those painful details become mental loops that cause PTSD-like flashbacks. The visual, the emotional imagery of those acts. It gets permanently imprinted on your brain and during this time of acute chemically charged stress.
So years later, these images can just pop into your head out of nowhere and re-traumatize you all over again.
Exactly. And the sources have this striking analogy that I think everyone needs to hear. You can't unknow a detail. Once it's in your head, it's permanent furniture in your trauma room.
Wow, permanent furniture in your trauma room.
You think you're gathering evidence for a case, but you're actually just decorating your own personal torture chamber with things you will regret knowing forever.
That is such a clear warning. The goal has to shift from collecting maximum information to collecting the minimum necessary information.
It's about conscious self-protection. Your system is already at war. The last thing you need to do is hand it more weapons to use against itself.
Let's shift to the immediate aftermath. Those first 48 hours, that first week, this is peak chaos. The shouting, the crying, packing bags. In that highly emotional state, what does the research say is the biggest mistake people make?
By far, the biggest and most damaging mistake is making permanent, irreversible decisions based on temporary, though extreme emotions.
Because your brain is still flooded with those chemicals.
It's flooded. Your cortisol levels are off the charts. You are reacting entirely from your amygdala, your primitive brain, the rational problem-solving part of your brain, the prefrontal cortex. It's basically offline. You literally can't think clearly.
So trying to end a marriage or manage finances in that state is a terrible idea.
It's a terrible idea.
Yeah.
And the sources detailed two very common but opposite errors that happen during this initial shockwave.
The first being the burn it all down approach.
Right. The impulse to immediately destroy everything, filing for divorce that afternoon, cutting off all contact, putting the house on the market. It feels decisive, you know?
Yeah.
It feels like taking back control.
But it's a decision made by the trauma.
Exactly. It's not made by the true self. And the second, which is just as destructive, is trying to fix it immediately through something called hysterical bonding.
Hysterical bonding, what is that?
It's often this chaotic, intense physical intimacy that happens right after discovery. But it can also be things like frantically trying to book a vacation together or getting into couples therapy within 24 hours.
What's driving that? It seems so counterintuitive.
It's the brain's instinctual reaction to reclaim the partner as a source of safety. Even if you consciously hate them in that moment, the trauma response is screaming, "Don't leave me. I need to keep the foundation of my life close to feel safe."
It's like grabbing for your security blanket, even though the blanket is on fire.
That is a perfect way to put it. It's a biological urge for proximity to the person who represents home, even if they just destroyed it. And it's so confusing for the healing process because it ties that feeling of temporary safety to the source of the trauma itself.
So you have these two pitfalls, total annihilation or this hyper-reconciliation. What's the recommended course of action for those first 48 hours then?
The sources are crystal clear on this. Breathe and pause. That is your only mission.
Stop.
Stop. And you must take deliberate steps to physically separate if you can, even for just a few days. And that separation isn't about starting a breakup. It's about starting psychological safety. The goal is to let the stress hormones dissipate.
So you're managing the internal chemical crisis before you can even touch the relational one.
Exactly. You're creating space for the primitive brain to stand down so the rational brain can even come back online. You need to let your cortisol levels drop before you make a single decision you might regret. The pause buys you time to move from reacting to responding.
That's a crucial distinction. Okay, let's move into the next phase, which really depends on the person who did the betraying, the confession.
Ah, yes, and this is often where the initial betrayal gets compounded by 1,000 smaller ones. It can be the most destructive phase of all.
Here's where it gets really interesting in the source material, because we know the cheater almost never tells the full truth up front. It starts small, it only happened once, and then, more details come out over weeks or months. Why? Why do they do that?
Well, the strategy has a name, trickle truth. And it operates under this massive psychological delusion on the part of the betrayer.
What delusion is that?
They genuinely think they're being merciful. They believe that by minimizing the pain and doling it out in smaller doses, they're protecting their partner from the full shock all over again.
But the reality of what that does to the betrayed partner is devastating.
The reality is that they are planting landmines all over the path to recovery. Every single time a new detail comes out, a week later, a month later, it lands with the force of a brand new betrayal.
So the original infidelity is the earthquake, but the trickle truth is a series of never-ending violent aftershocks.
Perfect analogy. And it completely destroys any chance of rebuilding trust. How can you rebuild a house when the builder keeps telling you about new cracks in the foundation every few days?
You can't. It's impossible. And what's the cost of that delay?
The cost is severe. The research is very specific here. Every time a new detail comes out, the metaphorical 2-year clock of healing resets to zero.
Zero.
Back to day one, think about that. You spent 6 weeks processing the one-time story, you start to feel like you can breathe again, and then they admit it was a 6-month affair. Boom. Your reality shattered again by the person who's supposed to be helping you heal. The whole process has to start over.
So the trickle truth is almost more harmful than the initial discovery. It prevents healing from ever gaining any momentum.
It absolutely is. It turns trauma recovery into chronic emotional warfare. It creates this constant nagging fear. What else are you lying about right now? Recovery can't even begin until the new, complete truth is on the table.
So if a couple has any hope of saving the relationship, what does the research demand from the person who cheated?
The only viable path forward is radical honesty from day one. It requires the cheater to offer the full, unvarnished, painful truth immediately, all at once.
One single event.
One single, horrible, truthful event. Because that allows the betrayed partner to finally establish a new ground zero, a stable, non-shifting reality from which they can actually begin to heal.
That takes immense courage from both people, the courage to tell that truth and the courage to hear it.
It does. But the sources are definitive on this point. One big, painful truth is better than 1,000 small lies that bleed the relationship to death over a year. The small lies kill recovery much more effectively than the big discovery ever could.
That's an incredible insight. Okay, let's summarize the key takeaways for you, the listener, trying to navigate this.
First, just understand what's happening to you. It is a literal betrayal trauma response. Your brain is in survival mode. So give yourself grace for that chemical chaos.
Second, in that detective phase, be a surgeon, not a collector. Distinguish between the vital information you need and the painful detail that becomes that permanent, awful furniture in your trauma room.
And in those first 48 hours, avoid those two huge pitfalls: making permanent decisions while you're chemically compromised, and the trap of hysterical bonding.
Right. Instead, the mission is to pause and breathe. Use physical separation if you need it, just to let those cortisol levels drop.
And finally, for any hope of recovery, the greatest threat is that trickle truth. It just resets the healing clock over and over. Radical honesty from day one is the only foundation you can build on.
It seems the entire recovery really hinges on managing that initial trauma and then establishing a new, reliable baseline of truth, no matter how painful that is.
And that leads to the ultimate question for you to explore, the one the sources point to as the long-term hurdle. If the trauma is this profound, if trust is so fundamentally shattered, can it ever truly be 100% again in the relationship's afterlife?
Or is it forever changed?
Or is the relationship forever changed, always operating with a different baseline of vulnerability? That's the question every person and every couple has to wrestle with in the quiet moments that follow.
A profound thought to end on. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive.